Okay, let's see. It says that I'm live. Hello, friends. Welcome back to SerenityOS Office Hours. Step 1, as always, is to figure out if you can hear me and see me, because I still don't trust this thing. So I'm going to wait for a sign of life. What? All right, excellent. Yes, it is working. Well, hello, friends. So lovely to see so many of you here. A lot of golden yaks in the house as well. It's been a while since I was here. I was out last week and spent Easter with my nephews, so it's good to be back at the computer. But it was also good to spend some time with kids, get some, I don't know, I always feel like playing with children gives me this totally different perspective on life, which is really important. Anyway, this is SerenityOS Office Hours. So what we do here is simple. Every Friday, usually, we talk about SerenityOS. So any questions or subjects that you want to talk about, bring it up and we'll look into it. And basically anything goes. And we'll see what comes up. Let me make sure that I have a working build here, actually. Okay. Yes. Well, it seems like the system is working. I know some people were complaining that the mouse and keyboard was not working today, but it seems to be working here. Wow, it's like I've been away for a week and I already forgot how we usually do this. I guess usually there are questions by this point. Now people are just saying hello, which is lovely. All right. So I guess it's kind of interesting because I don't really have something ongoing at the moment to talk about. I'm doing some research projects that I'm not ready to show yet. So I'm going to kind of rely on other people to bring up stuff to talk about. Daniel says, since Serenity is becoming more of a community effort, do you think there will come a time when you make pull requests rather than merge directly? Maybe. We'll see. It's a possibility for sure. Vishnu says, what minimal features should a language like C have? Wait, what? What features should a language like C should have had, like generics? That's a strange question, I guess. I don't really know how to answer that since C doesn't really have generics outside of macros. So I guess I would say about C that it is unfortunate that it doesn't have generics. So if you're making a minimal C-like language today, I would definitely suggest adding generics to it rather than limiting yourself to having macros. But I'm absolutely not an expert at programming language design, so I don't know. Last but two says, what left the black mark on the wall behind you? This right here? It's from this chair. So I've kind of turned around my workspace. So I used to be sitting in this direction. And then whenever the door would open behind me, I would swing around like that and very often hit the wall with the chair. And that's just what that is from. Just me spinning around in the chair. Let's see. Phoenix Firewings says, how long do you think it will be until your work on SerenityOS in SerenityOS on bare metal? I have no idea. I really have no idea. I think probably other people will do it before I do. As I always say when this question comes up, I am not in a hurry. Like, I like to be comfortable. I like to use good tools. So At the moment, Linux is a better tool for development than Serenity is for development of itself. So I use Linux, but the moment that changes and Serenity is more convenient than Linux, I will just switch then. Kleines Filmröllchen says, how does Serenity handle PS2? A technical question about Serenity. Now that's something we can look into. So we have this thing called PS2 keyboard device and PS2 mouse device. Both of them are in the kernel. And a particularly irritating thing about PS2 is that both the mouse and the keyboard share an I/O port. And whenever data comes in from the keyboard or the mouse in PS2, you have to disambiguate the data by looking at a flag in one of the I/O registers. So that's something that we've historically had some bugs around, not checking that flag in all the right places. And there was also at least one bug in QEMU where they wouldn't set or clear the flag when polling that buffer in some case, which manifested as like mouse desync in Serenity. But basically the way that it works is that it's an interrupt-driven I/O mechanism where either the keyboard or the mouse has data for the operating system, so they put that data into a buffer, and then they raise an IRQ. We learn of the IRQ because we are an IRQ handler, and then we end up in handle IRQ. And because the mouse and the keyboard are both attached to the i8042 PS2 controller, they just call through to this shared object, which then looks at, let's see, so it fetches the, I don't remember exactly where that is, but it looks at the state of the port somewhere to figure out what it is. And then we read a byte from the device. Depending on if it's mouse or keyboard, we read from the device using a device-specific handler. And then the format of the data you get from a PS2 mouse, it's, as I recall, it's like 4 bytes or something like that. There's like an X byte, a Y byte, a wheel byte, and then a button byte. I think maybe, and then I don't remember all the specifics, but you can definitely figure them out by looking at the source code, or by reading some documentation of PS2. But if you have sort of a more specific question about how PS2 works, we can definitely look into something if you want. Angus Finch was asking, what is the gap command that you use? Is it perhaps an alias for some Git functionality or its own tool? Aha, alias, grep gap. It is simply git add -p, which is git add, but it asks you about each individual hunk if you want to add it or not. Very, very handy command. Definitely recommended. Let's see. Ecoptic says, how does Serenity handle driver crashes or errors? So drivers currently run as part of the kernel, which means that if a driver crashes, then the kernel crashes. So it's not really something that has been a problem in practice so far, because we have a very small set of drivers and they're fairly well maintained, at least most of them. But yeah, if a driver crashes, the kernel panics at the moment. Let's see. Eric says, the change to AirNode seems to have building some ports. For example, OpenSSH. Removing the build here and rebuild world did not fix this for me. What other directories should I clean to get a clean build? You probably need to rebuild the tool chain. I think your tool chain depends on the definition of AirNode. Slendy says, why is Serenity written in object-oriented programming style? Is there a specific reason? Yes, because that's a programming style that I like and I find very expressive. So that's what I used to build Serenity. Vishnu says, any design patterns that SerenityOS borrows from macOS other than being a mono repo? Sure. One of the main design patterns, if you want to call it that, that we take from macOS is the use of purgeable memory. So we support the same type of purgeable memory that macOS and iOS have, which is essentially a big chunk of memory that the kernel is allowed to take away from the process without coordinating with the process under certain circumstances. And it is a very valuable technique that allows programs to use a lot more memory than they normally might want to, without worrying that they sort of step on the toes of other programs. Because if the kernel decides that it finds a better use for this memory, it can just take it away from the program that allocated it. So it's a very interesting technique, and it's used pervasively in Serenity. We use it for images in the browser. So big images can get deallocated by the kernel without interfering with the browser. And we use it for the windowing system so that if a window is minimized, for example, and the kernel needs memory, it can just take the backing store of that window. And even in fact, when one window is on top of another, which is a really neat thing, I think, if you have one window on top of another, and it's fully opaque, then at this point, the kernel is free to deallocate all of the window buffers for the terminal because it's not visible on screen. And of course, if I reveal it, then the terminal may need to reallocate that memory. But this is a very valuable memory management technique that we take from macOS. And there are many other things as well, but that's my favorite one, I guess. Pedro says, a video explaining the super build structure of Serenity. I don't know if that's really video material. That sounds more like something that maybe we should write down. The super build is, I guess I wouldn't even say at this point that I understand all the details of it. So I'm just a user of it like everybody else. The people who have worked on the super build, like Andrew, they would probably be able to explain it in a little document, and that could be really cool, maybe as a blog post or something, but I don't really know if it's that interesting. Maybe it is. But I mean, the purpose of it is just to be able to build our own command line tools for Linux that we can then use to build the rest of the system. So it is a way to achieve that. I guess it is probably pretty interesting. Maybe we should ask Andrew to write a little bit about it, since he's the one who designed the whole thing. Vishnu says, can SerenityOS access more than 4 gigabytes of RAM? Of course. You can access a lot more RAM. We are a 64-bit operating system, so in theory, you can put as much as you like in there. Of course, in practice, there are some kernel data structures that need to be adapted to support larger amounts of physical memory. So we will probably run out of static storage around 11 gigs here, just like Eric says. But fixing that is really just a matter of improving our physical memory map data structures in the kernel so that they can accommodate more physical RAM. In fact, that's probably something that I should look into at some point. The memory management in the kernel is always kind of an interesting problem, because you have to write memory management without even like the most basic of memory management functions, and you end up like something always has to go in static storage, but you want to build something that can bootstrap itself in static storage and then become dynamic later, which is a bit tricky. Daniel Brooks says, how much control do applications have over their window frame? For example, increasing its height or adding a custom control like a button. Can/should apps handle their own window frame? So at the moment, the window frame is completely handled by Windows Server. And not just the window frame, but also the menu. So when you turn on and off the menu here, like this, looks very funny when it goes up and down like that. This is all happening in Windows Server. Like the program has no idea whether it has a menu bar visible or not. And there's no way to change anything substantial about the window frame or the way it's rendered, or to receive events on it or something like that. What you can do if you insist, I guess, is to make a frameless window and then make your own little window frame. But I wouldn't recommend doing that. And for me personally, like I always disliked this tendency, especially among old Windows applications, that they sort of insisted on making their own visual style instead of conforming to the general desktop style. And that's definitely not something I would like to replicate here, because I feel like it's nice to have a very consistent desktop, right? Like that's one of the main, I guess, UI motivators for me personally working on the system, is to build something that's really, really consistent and really, really, I don't know, like polished, I guess. And yeah, but that doesn't mean that we can't have some nice API for making specific modifications to the window frame. Like if you want to do something that makes a lot of sense, like maybe there should be an API to add some additional button up here that would do something that makes a lot of sense in some applications, but just not for every application. Or I don't know. It's something that we would have to look at specific cases. But yeah, as Matthias says here, like client-side decoration is just annoying. I totally agree. I think it's just a gateway into ugly desktops. That I guess that you could say that it's another design pattern of Apple's that I really agree with. That you don't want to shower the user with options to control their UI, because most users have bad taste, and if you give them too many controls, they will just make a mess of their desktop. So I do like limiting the controls and ensuring that you have a nice looking desktop in the common case instead. Eric says, there was a PR for LLVM 14. Does it have any interesting features that Serenity can profit from? I don't actually know. It's very possible. All I know is that Clang format, the version of Clang format that comes with LLVM 14, allows us to enforce more of our coding style. So we're definitely, I think we already switched to Clang format 14. So I am excited about that, but I haven't looked at LLVM 14 itself. One issue with the compilers is always that we support both GCC and Clang. So if one of them were to add like a super awesome feature, it really only affects you if you use that toolchain. But of course, if one of them were to add such an amazing feature that we can't live without it, then we should obviously make use of it. But I don't know the answer to the question. I haven't looked closely at it. I need to actually look at what's new in LLVM 14. If somebody knows some awesome stuff that's new in LLVM 14, I would love to hear about it. Joel says, in SerenityOS, can you map the same physical address to multiple virtual addresses? Yes. I suppose you can. If you have a file, for example, then you can map it multiple times and you will have the same underlying physical address, but multiple different virtual addresses. And you can also map the same physical memory across multiple processes. So not just different addresses, but different address spaces. If you send a piece of shared memory across an IPC channel, for example. But yeah, definitely possible. Biff says, what keyboard are you using? I am using, dang it, I already forgot what this one is called. Oh yeah, let me Google it here. K280E. I think it's this guy right here. Yes. A cheap Logitech K280E. Which I picked up because my previous slightly fancier keyboard broke, and I just needed a replacement quickly, so I got this one, and I'm really happy with it because it's actually a bit more quiet than the one I had before. And honestly, that's the main feature I look for in a keyboard is quiet. I don't really like if a keyboard is quiet, that trumps every other feature for me. Vishnu says, can SerenityOS have a long uptime like for years? How do you test memory leaks and other issues that may cause the OS to randomly crash when idle? Right, so that's two questions. The first one is, can it have an uptime for years? Sure, absolutely. The system, when it's idle, it doesn't do very much. So if you boot the system and just let it sit there, I think it can probably go for 10 years without much trouble. We don't have any counters that I can immediately think of that would overflow anytime soon. We use 64-bit counters for a lot of the important stuff. If you're building the 64-bit port, at least. So I don't see why that shouldn't work. Like, I've had situations where like I left SerenityOS running on a computer at work, for example, and forgot about it, and then I came back like 6 weeks later and it was still running. So and everything was fine. But it's not something I test regularly, but it's at least something that worked just fine in the past. Now, how do you test for memory leaks and other issues that may cause the operating system to crash when idle? That really depends on what the issue is, right? If you're looking at kernel issues, then most issues require their own style of debugging. So very often, if you're trying to track down a memory leak, it's often it's not as simple as like a missing free or a missing delete, but it's more like a reference counted object that has one extra ref on it from somewhere, and you have to figure out where it's coming from. So you end up doing a little bit of instrumentation code, maybe adding some print statements, but it really depends on the issue. We don't have like a good systematic way of doing that. There are many things that we could do. Like we could, for example, do a stress testing where we just run a virtualized version of the system and do something repeatedly that should free all resources. Like, just start 5 million processes one after the other and make sure that the total memory used didn't grow from the start to the end, because it shouldn't. But we don't have anything automated like that at the moment. Let's see. Shivendra says, if somebody is working with JavaScript and PHP and wants to learn C++, how should he go about it? Can you suggest some learning resource and beginner-friendly projects? I think that you just need to get started with any learning resource. I'm not good at suggesting things for beginners because it's been such a long time since I was a beginner, so I don't know what the good resources are these days. But in general, I think when you're a beginner, it doesn't matter so much which resources you use or what projects you do, as long as you do a lot of programming. You just got to practice a lot. I mean, like actually sitting down and writing code. And even if it's slow, even if it makes you feel stupid, you just have to churn out thousands of lines. And over time, you will get good and you will be able to pick out the next resource and the next project for yourself anyway. But when you're a beginner, the important thing is to just do something. So don't worry about, am I using the right resource? Like, is this the right tutorial for me or whatever? It doesn't matter. Just write code. Sho says, do you guys plan to make a more advanced font renderer with subpixel rendering and everything? Well, as I like to say on this channel, I don't really have a plan. So the best way, if you want to see something happen in SerenityOS, the recommended way is to do it yourself. So you're very welcome to improve our font rendering system with subpixel rendering. It would definitely improve fidelity. And currently things look a little bit silly sometimes because of unwanted gaps due to pixel rounding and stuff. But I don't know that anybody's specifically working on that right now. And I don't personally have a plan to do it, but it's definitely a feature that would improve the system. And it's probably something I will work on eventually if nobody else does, but there is no plan. Ramses II says, greetings from Estonia. I really like what you're doing. Well, today we learned that Ramses was actually from Estonia. Well, hello, Ramses. Good to have you here. Max Joker says, but it should be allowed. There is some use in applications like Winamp that are designed to be extra tiny. So that would be in reference to client-side decorations. Right, but Winamp is, at the end of the day, Winamp is kind of like a very special case of something that people have nostalgic feelings about. But if you downloaded a music player today and it looked like that, it would probably make you say, why can't you just conform to the UI style of the system? At least that's my intuition. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong about that. And I mean, I have fond feelings for Winamp myself. I used it for many years in the 90s and 2000s, but I don't necessarily think that we need to accommodate or I don't think we should accommodate applications that want to look different just for the sake of it. Pedro says, have you seen the mold linker? It's very fast. Yes, I have seen it. It's even part of our, I think we have it as part of our tool chain now, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, build mold. So yeah, I've definitely seen it. It is definitely fast. I think, what's his name? Ryu does a great job on kicking everybody's butt in the linking department. And I love when things like that happen, like somebody shows up and has something that's like way faster than the competition, and it gets everybody excited to compete again. So I think the cool thing about mold isn't just that mold itself is cool, but like, I guess it's going to lead to many improvements in other linkers as well, hopefully. Axel says, I tried to compile Serenity but couldn't because my computer had an older GCC version, GCC 10. Is there anything from C++ 20 or the like that Serenity uses and finds useful? Yes, we use tons of stuff from C++ 20 and, you know, from 14, 17, and 20. Like concepts, for example, we have a lot of requires. I guess I have to search for it that way. Yeah, so we're using a lot of requires, which has been pretty nice. And there's definitely a lot more stuff we could do with C++20, but with new language features, it's always like you have to give them some time to bake and discover what's useful to you and what's not. We don't necessarily want to rush into using every feature just because it's new, but what tends to happen is that we sort of organically try out new features in a limited scope and then see, oh, here's how we can improve this or that feature of the system by using this new language feature. And then if it's a good thing, then it will propagate. And if it's not, we'll probably go back to it the way we did it before. But yes, there are definitely many things from C++20 that we use. So you will need a newer compiler in order to build a system. Slendy says, do you touch type or do you have a different style of typing? Ooh, I don't know. I never like formally learned to type, so I don't know. I probably don't do touch typing because I don't know what it is. So, yeah, this isn't something I'm familiar with. I just kind of, I mean, I don't look at the keyboard, but I have developed my own style of typing, I guess, without training. Dither8 says, any GUI features that must be avoided? Things like basic/advanced option or apps having their own embedded windows. Oh, any GUI features that must be avoided? I don't know. There's probably a lot of them that we sort of avoid by design, but there isn't like a document or a list or something where it says like, don't do this, this, and that in the GUI. It's more like something that we discuss on a case-by-case basis as things develop. I suppose it's not really a GUI feature per se, but something that I find really important is that whenever a piece of GUI functionality is reusable by multiple applications, then we should try to develop it in such a way that it's part of a library, so that all applications that want to have some functionality can pick it up from a library instead. And I mean, it sounds obvious, but most desktops are not developed as cohesively as SerenityOS, so there's a lot less code sharing out in the wild than what we see in our system. And I think we have to consciously be aware of that and sort of make an effort to identify things that are done by multiple applications and consolidate them in like libgui or whatever other library is appropriate. And that's definitely something where it's a continuous process, because you find some new functionality that you want to do, and usually you're doing it in one application, but eventually it matures and you want to have the same feature in some other app, and then sometimes it's easy to just copy paste the stuff from the first app and adapt it to the second one, but in most cases it is at that point that you should probably make the effort to generalize the component instead and put it in a library. There are a few cases in Serenity I've seen where we still need to do this, but I think on the whole we've been pretty good about it. Any GUI features that must be avoided? I'm not really answering the question that you asked, just thinking about it in general. I don't know. I'll have to come back to that one. Big Mistake says, what are you working on these days? I am prototyping something. It's not ready yet, but I'll show you soon. And I think you're going to like it. Joel Peterson, Joel Peterson, sounds vaguely Swedish, says, do you use Intrinsics extensively for optimization anywhere in the project? Just getting started learning about it and would love to have some code to learn from. I think in the software GPU implementation, they do a fair bit of SIMD intrinsics. So, yeah, they use like these types which essentially become SIMD instructions, but they're not like the traditional like Intel SSE intrinsics or whatever, but rather, I guess, high-level types that you can then use arithmetic on, and they become like SSE instructions, which is really cool. I don't know if we have any of those like low-level. I don't even remember what they look like. I'm in Intrin. XMM Intrin. Okay, so we have some intrinsics here. Yeah, I don't know. I think in general, like if you can get away with just using these cool integer times 4 types, it's very, very nice because it's so expressive, but sometimes you do have to drop down to raw intrinsics, or in rare cases, even down to assembly, I guess, but it's not something that we do anywhere, I think. I don't know. I haven't looked at this enough. Should ask the OpenGL people who are working on our OpenGL implementation. They would be probably the best people for that. Kushagra says, "What's your PC specs? Can you run SerenityOS?" It's been a long time since I tried to run Serenity on this exact computer, actually. So I don't know if it runs it at the moment. But my PC specs are a computer that people on Reddit built for me. So I've linked this many times. I gotta put this in the FAQ, actually. But my PC was built from parts that people decided to donate. And basically this was more than 2 years ago, I think, where a bunch of people got together and they thought that my computer that they see me using in the videos is way too slow and I should have a little bit faster one. And they hooked me up, and I'm still using that, so you can find all the details there. Let's see, Abhishek says, "Hello, Andreas, greetings from India." Greetings to you, Abhishek. I have been following your work for quite a while now. I must say it's really inspiring. Glad to hear it. I'm glad to hear that. Good to have you here. Adam says, "Is it mostly Linux/Win9X that inspired you, or did you ever use Solaris, CDE, or OS2, or some other funky systems in the 90s? So I didn't use Solaris in the 90s, but I did use both Solaris and OS2 in the 2000s. And I collected Sun hardware for a while in my late teens, I guess, and got some familiarity with Solaris back then. And I do have a soft spot for CDE, even though it objectively looks pretty bad. But I also used, I had some DEC hardware from Digital, so I used the OSF1 operating system, of which also had a variant of CDE, of course. Yeah, OSF1 and True64 from DEC or HP or whoever put that out. Also, why is my Google in Swedish? I don't want that. Can I? Dang it. Yes, change to English. OSF1. I used that. I used the mock kernel. Oh, I didn't even realize. But most of the inspiration visually, of course, is from the late 90s Windows operating systems, with sprinkles here and there from Mac OS. But for the command line, it's really a mishmash of inspiration from Linux heavily, but also from other Unixes like BSD, Solaris. and whatnot. Joshua says, SerenityOS seems to be fairly lightweight. Is this just because it's early in development, or do you envision it being a lightweight system and or it being a good candidate for more limited hardware? So, yes, it is lightweight because it's early in development, of course. We haven't had time to bloat it up. But it is also part of at least my own personal vision for it. To stay lightweight, because I don't see why we should mess things up by adding all the abstraction layers that typically cause the bloat that you see in other systems. We have the unique opportunity to build a lightweight system that stays lightweight because we control all of the libraries, all of the applications, all of everything, right? It almost seems to me like it would take more effort to mess this up than it would take more effort to make it bloated than to stay slim, which is good. But let's see if my theory about that pans out in reality. So far so good, I would say, right? I mean, we've scaled the project up from just me to hundreds of people, from a couple of thousand lines to hundreds of thousands of lines, almost a million lines of code at this point. And at least from my perspective, having seen where it started and where it is now, it doesn't seem like it accumulated that much bloat. There are some performance problems for sure, but all of those are things we can get to, things we can work on and whittle down. I don't think there are any fundamental architectural problems that prevent us from remaining a lightweight feeling system. So that is probably a good thing. We'll see how that goes though. Devashish says, the other day, someone on Twitter said something along the lines of, learning to optimize for real CPUs is more important than learning about computational complexity. In my opinion, both are important. Your thoughts? Oh. Well, I guess this is in reference to how CPU caches sort of invalidate some of the basic big O complexity considerations. I guess a classical one is if you have something that's like O n squared or even O n cubed, but the input is small enough to fit in a cache line, then it's often still much faster to do like the O n cubed thing than it is to do something totally different. Just so, and like the same example, but not as extreme for other situations. I think it is. Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. Like both are important. It's important to understand how cache locality affects performance, and it's also important to understand like basic big O complexity, right? It seems like a false dichotomy to me that you would have to choose one or the other. I think both are important and valuable, and having more information is always better than having less. Let's see. DJ Wisdom says, hi, Andreas, how are you? I'm good. How are you? Will SerenityOS provide support for additional path for custom fonts and themes as located inside user home directory? For example, home config fonts or home config themes? Well, that sounds like something that you could implement. So I would suggest that you implement that. That sounds like a very reasonable feature. Sure, if you do it, we'll support it. Alex Major says, does it have a graphics card? Oh, that's my computer. So the original one did only have the integrated graphics of the 9900K. I did a year ago or something like that. I added a fancier graphics card so that I could get a bit better rendering performance for videos. So I totally forgot what it's called. I'm gonna cheat, look it up. It's definitely somewhere here in the list. Yes, an RTX 2060. It's not the fanciest by far, but it's no slouch. It took my video rendering times down substantially, which is nice. Let's see. Ditherate says, I think IRIX has a nice aesthetic. Yes, I guess it has a charm to it. I won't deny. I never had an SGI machine though. It would be maybe something to get one day. Pedro says, Pledge and Unveil are amazing. They should be in Linux. I agree. They should be in Linux. Linus, hello Linus, how's it going? Linus says, next Serenity developer interview when? Well, I have my next guest, but he's a little bit hard to schedule. But it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen. Kind Name says, Terry Davis once said that professionals write their own compiler. Do you agree? No, I don't really agree with that statement. I think most professionals don't write their own compiler. So it's a bit of a silly, obviously false statement. Nuclear energy is good for climate, says, opinion on Nix/GUIX. I don't really have any experience using Nix or GUIX, so I consequently don't have an opinion about them. Let's see. Galaxy says, I really want to help with SerenityOS, but I am completely lost on how to. Are there any such guides, be it video or text, that help noobs like me get started? There isn't really a guide. There is more like the advice that I always give to everybody, which if you haven't heard it already is, if you want to work on SerenityOS, the best thing you can do is to just build the system and then mess around with it. Click around, use the system, play around with everything until you discover something that doesn't work right, or something that you think could be better. Something that speaks to you personally, like, oh, this little detail here is not the way it should be. And then try to fix it or try to improve it. I've given this advice to everybody so far, and it's worked out beautifully. And it makes it so that everybody starts working on the system in their own little corner. Instead of having like, oh, everybody comes in this way, we get like hundreds of different ways of approaching the system. So that's my recommendation. Just play around until you find something that you think could be better, and then try to figure out how to make it better. And of course, when you have questions, we have a Discord server. You can come there and ask about how things work, or you can even ask me here on office hours, how does this or that thing work? And we can take a look at it. Let's see. Christoph says, hello, is there some work in SerenityOS for a person who works on a daily basis as .NET web developer and never worked on system projects? Your work is very inspiring for me. Greetings from Poland. Well, hello, Christoph. Nice to have you here. I think, of course, yes, of course. I mean, it really doesn't matter what you are in the outside world. When you come to SerenityOS, you can work on anything. You can be anything. Here we're just programmers, right? Like there is no specialization other than what you make up in your own mind. So you can pick up any part of the system and learn it and work on it. And exactly the same thing I said to the previous question. Just mess around with the system until you find something that seems interesting and try to work out how it works and come up with something you can improve about it. There is no shortage of bugs and things that can be improved. That's why this advice works so well, because the system has thousands of bugs and thousands of things that can be better. So it's not hard to find. Everybody finds something when they start looking. Let's see. Mike Chorak says, generics that don't dramatically slow down compile times would be nice. Oh, I agree. They would be nice. Leader of You says, is there a negative for not immediately using 64-bit and starting the project as 32-bit? I don't know. I mean, sure, everything has pros and cons. So the main con of starting SerenityOS as a 32-bit project was that we had to spend additional time later, like porting parts of it to 64-bit and making them 64-bit friendly. But at the same time, if we hadn't started as a 32-bit system, maybe it never would have gotten to the point where it did anyway, because maybe I would have been frustrated by not being as familiar with it or whatever. So I tend to just accept things the way that they are, and I'm just happy that we got to the point where we got to. And there are going to be things a year from today that we look back on today and we think like, oh, wow, I can't believe that we're doing things that way back then. I wish we would have switched to this new way sooner, and we wouldn't have spent all the time doing things the old way. But if we have to remember that the old way got us to where we are, and it's important to have a healthy amount of respect for the old ways, even as you discover better ways and change your own ways. Let's see. Max Joker says, it's not that CPU caches invalidate OFN notation, it's how the basic OFN notation often doesn't consider RAM delays, etc. Well, I mean, why would basic OFN notation consider RAM delays in the first place? It's just, there's just like, I don't know, orthogonal concepts, I guess. Anyways, let's see. Dither8 says, I found an old KDE group photo with you in it from 2006. I put it in the Discord a few days ago. Hope it didn't embarrass you. Nah, that's fine. Let's find it. That would probably be at Academy 2006 group photo. Is that it? That's me. Right there. Look at that. I'm even wearing a KDE shirt. And, oh, look, there's Lars, who started the KHTML engine. This is 16 years ago, or something like that. Quite a while ago now. Wow, I didn't think about all these people in so long. Slendy says, do you still have that KDE shirt? I don't, actually. In fact, I remember burning that shirt while I was camping, like many years ago. It was like 12 years ago or something. I was camping somewhere, and I ended up putting the shirt as part of a little fire that I had going. I don't know why. It seemed funny at the time or something, but I don't know. I did a lot of stupid things when I was younger. And the KDE shirt was an unfortunate victim of my edgy behavior. Camille says, I've been wondering what's the reason for ACK classes to exist within the ACK namespace, only for them to be pulled into the global namespace at the end of each header file. So the main reason that we do that is for linking purposes. So that if we have something called ACK vector in a program that, think about third-party programs. So if you link with a Serenity library from some third-party thing, and the third-party thing has something that they call vector, and now you link it with some of our code, then we will collide with this. And vector is a very, very common name. So this was sort of something that I decided early on, that in order to be able to link with third-party stuff, let's just put all of this stuff into its own namespace, and then just pull it into the global namespace for our code with using declarations. But when you're linking, then you can link with something that has its own vector, and it doesn't collide with our vector because ours is ACK vector. That was sort of the original reason. But I don't think that it hasn't been like that important of a problem to solve in the end, because we don't use really any third-party software, so it's really only for ports, and most ports don't even interface with our C++ libraries in the first place and don't link directly against them. They link against like SDL or just libc or something. So I don't know, it's kind of it's an artifact of this early idea that we need to avoid trouble if linking into software that has colliding names. Let's see. Nuclear Energy says, do you foresee some form of dependency hell in the future of SerenityOS? I don't, I guess. At least not in the way that we currently develop SerenityOS, because everything is here. So why would we have a dependency hell? If you have, the only dependency hell that we have is that you have to rebuild everything, which it can be its own hell, I suppose, especially if build times continue to increase. And but it's not like a classical, what you would classically think of as a dependency hell. It's more like a rebuild time hell. Let's see. Devashish says, I'm personally not a fan of the idea that you should limit yourself to learning things that will serve you in the future. Some things are worth learning for the sheer fun of it, but I honor other opinions. Well, I totally agree. Some things are worth learning for the sheer fun of it. I think if you approach everything with the mindset that it has to be useful for you in the future, maybe that's a really productive mindset or something, but it really takes the fun out of a lot of things. And a good example of that from my personal life is that yesterday, while I was going to sleep, I listened to this guy called Displaced Gamers on YouTube, who was going through like explaining something in Mega Man 2 on the NES, how that works. And I'm gonna link that in the chat because it's a really fun channel. Like, he just does these deep dives on random parts of Nintendo games, looks at how the code works. And I really didn't learn anything immediately useful for me from watching this, but I really enjoyed it. And it was fun to hear about how Mega Man implements things and like why certain parts of the game are laggy and things like that. It was interesting. It was fun. It doesn't have to be valuable. Yeah, so I guess I agree with you. Ditherate says, were you excited about C++ 20 modules as a way of cutting build time, or was that someone else? Well, I don't know if I'm excited about it, but I'm cautiously optimistic, let's say. If it turns out that modules can cut build times, then that's awesome. Let's use them. If it turns out to not be valuable for build times, or if it significantly worsens the compiled program in some way, like maybe build time is faster, but the resulting executable is much slower or whatever. I don't know. Then we have to look at what kind of compromise we're willing to make. But I'm cautiously optimistic, right? I'm just going to wait and see how it pans out. As far as I understand, we are currently blocked on CMake support for modules. So once CMake understands C++ 20 modules, then we can try to use them. But at the moment, it would be a bit too much of a manual hassle to try to integrate it with our build system. So at least that's my understanding. Let's see. Polish Civil says, hello, is it normal that the more I'm aware of programming, the slower I code? I think due to thinking about design/performance. How do you tackle the pre-code typing process? Thank you. Well, that's interesting. I guess if I think back, whenever I'm learning something new, I'm usually really, really slow. And then when I learn more about it, I get faster. I would guess that's the common experience, but I understand what you're getting at, that like as you learn more sophisticated things about programming, you have to incorporate those sophisticated ideas in your general thought process, and that will probably initially slow you down. I have to say, I don't necessarily remember feeling this way, but it's been a long time since I was a beginner. So it's often something I struggle with relating when people ask me like this or that kind of beginner questions or early intermediate questions. I feel like I'm not giving great answers because it's just been such a long time ago since I felt this way myself. But in general, I would say that you'll keep getting faster as you get more experience. But your question was, how do you tackle the pre-code typing process? In general, I don't really tackle it, I guess. I just try to start right away. And I guess what I do in practical terms is I look for some way to start working on what I want to do right away. And I know some people like to draw diagrams and write down descriptions of what they're going to do. I find, me personally, it works better for me if I just start writing code. And I start writing something really, really high level that maybe would be essentially equivalent to drawing a diagram of what I want to do. I just express my diagram in code instead. Again, that gets me, makes me warm, gets me going. But I don't really have that pre-typing moment. But that's not to say that there's anything wrong with that. It's just my pre-code typing is done via typing. Feels like a bad answer, but it's the best one I have. Slendy says, I keep quitting existing programming projects and starting new ones, which leads me to keep having uncompleted projects. What can I do to fix this issue? You can fix this issue by completing your projects. And that's not meant to be snarky. You can actually just take a project that you didn't complete and take an honest look at it and make an actual decision. Like, is this something I care about? Is this interesting enough to me that I want to complete it? If yes, do some actual work on it. If no, if it's not interesting enough to complete it, then be honest with yourself and make an official decision that you don't care about completing this project, and then you can stop feeling bad about it. But really, if you make a lot of things that you don't complete, if you actually want to complete them, then it's really simple. You just have to go back to them and keep working on them. I rarely do this myself because I don't have a lot of random uncompleted projects. I used to have a lot of random uncompleted projects, and I used to feel bad about them. But then at some point, I went back and looked at them, and I decided that, okay, so these 4 projects I'm never going to finish, so I'm just going to get rid of them, put them in a backup directory somewhere. But this one thing that's actually kind of cool, I'm going to work on that, and I'm going to do that right now. And that's sort of how my projects survived over the years. And my emulator that I have up on GitHub is an example of that. Like, it's something that I come back to every now and then. Wow, it's been a while since I hacked on it now. But I'll come back to it someday again and poke at it. And I also have a bunch of things that I'm not going to poke at. Yeah, but I think it's simple. You just have to work on them. And if you don't want to work on them, then admit it to yourself and let them go. Leorian says, old computer and game console tricks to get around system limitations can be really interesting, even if they no longer are relevant or useful. Yes, exactly. It can be super interesting. And it doesn't have to be anything more than interesting. In fact, I think watching videos about programming on old game consoles or things like that, they get me excited about programming and not excited about making a video game for the NES. They just get me excited about programming in general. And then I take that excitement to what I'm working on. And that's a really good thing. It doesn't matter where our excitement comes from. If we have it, we should be grateful. Hardcore Vibes says, I'm watching your channel for the sheer fun. I don't know anything about programming. Wow. Well, if you've been watching this channel for a while, I guess you must know something about programming at this point. Maybe you just don't even know it. Maybe if you sat down and opened a text editor, you would find yourself writing a bunch of code. Let's see. Big Smoke CIC says, this might seem like a stupid question since I'm still learning C++, but how does the new keyword work when compiling for Serenity? My understanding is that it would use malloc in the background, but since I assume the impl of malloc is platform dependent, how do you tell the compiler to point new to the appropriate malloc implementation? So you can actually override new globally if you like. The default implementation of new usually just invokes malloc, I guess. But it's been a while since I looked at this, but I think we have our own override still. Yeah, so here's what new does on Serenity. As you can see, it just calls malloc. So you can make your own global operator new like this and call a different malloc if you prefer. That's how you do it. Now, if you do this in a random program, you might break compatibility with libraries. So like if you're linking with some other library that uses its own global new differently, you might make a mess for yourself. But in our case, since we control the whole stack, then this works for us at the moment. Nuclear Energy says, any advice on reading code written by other people? My main advice when I try to, when people want to read code is to don't just read the code, but build it. And don't just build it, but make some little changes to it. If you're reading the code of GIMP, for example, and you want to learn about how the blur filter works in GIMP, then instead of just reading the code, why not get a local copy of it, build it, and then put some print statements in the blur function, and print out like the local variables and see what they contain and stuff like that. Just to, I don't know, to get sort of interactive with the code. That's something I always do when I try to understand how something works, and it's super helpful in getting a better grip on it. At least for me, it has always been. So like active code reading rather than passive code reading. Hero Trojan says, hi, I'm just here. I would like to ask you, for a newbie like me, what type of strength should I have? and programming language I should learn to understand operating systems. What type of strength you should have? Oh, well, I would recommend strength training 3 times a week, doing a basic barbell program with a healthy mix of upper body and lower body. But that's probably not what you're asking about. If you want to understand an operating system, I would say the main thing you should do is pick an operating system and then learn the language used in that operating system. That would be the most important strength. So if you want to understand Linux, you need to learn C. If you want to understand SerenityOS, you need to learn C++ and so on. And then kind of what I was saying to the reading code question, that to understand it better, you want to mess around with it, change stuff, see what happens. Let's see. Ooh. Calculated Risk Taker says, I can't wrap my head around how an ELF binary is executed on CPU, and what is executing the bootloader, and is it different than executing an ELF binary? Thank you very much for the super chat, Calculated Risk Taker. So you can't wrap your head around how an ELF binary is executed on CPU. Well, the main thing to know about it is that the program headers are the sort of the chart that tells the operating system what to do. So if you look at, let's use readelf on, where is the shell? So if we look at our shell using readelf-l, then now we're looking at a dump of the ELF program headers. And these are really the details that we need to run an ELF executable. The headers here, and also this information here, the entry point. This is the address that we want to start execution at. So if you're I don't know exactly what you're asking in reference to, but like if you're building a program loader for your own operating system, for example, what you want to do is you want to iterate through all the program headers and then look for these guys called load. And I'm going to assume that you're starting out with just a statically linked executable. We have dynamic linking here, but let's ignore that. So if you have a static executable, you're just going to have a bunch of these loads. And what you want to do is you want to, for each of these loads, you want to extract the physical address of this header. So this tells you where in the ELF file this data is. And then here, the file size tells you how many bytes we should extract from the ELF file. And the virtual address field tells you where in memory to put it. Now, these are position independent executables, so they're looking a little bit different than you might with a simple statically linked non-position independent. But essentially, to build a basic static NoPy ELF loader, you just want to iterate through the program headers, load all of the data from each load program header from the physical address within the file, put it at the virtual address specified here, and then jump to the entry point to start execution. Then your question was, what is executing the bootloader? Well, the CPU executes the bootloader, and it depends on how your machine is booting, if it's booting via BIOS or UEFI or what. But usually every computer system has like a little built-in firmware that does a bunch of diagnostics and setup when you boot, and then it transfers the control by having the CPU jump into a bootloader that was loaded from a hard drive. And it's really just the firmware, like the BIOS firmware or whatever, jumps into code loaded from the hard drive. And it's not, I mean, it's different and it's not different from running an ELF binary. It's different because the bootloader usually has like a different contract than an ELF loader. So it's not just loading an ELF binary and executing it, but it's In the case of BIOS, for example, the way the bootloader is invoked is that it loads the first sector of from a device and then loads that into memory and then jumps to the first byte of it, I think. So it doesn't do any parsing of headers or things like that. But it's like a really broad and vague question. I hope that gave you some idea of where you can look for more information. But thank you for the super chat. So let's just back up a little bit here. Tommy says, pre-code drinking tea. Indeed. Linus says, how did you find KK Music? I really like their music. Kind of surprising how small the channel is. Ah, indeed. KK Music. So KK Music is a friend of mine who makes music. And it's a small channel indeed, but it's so small that I can't even find it that way. KK Music, let's find it. But they were nice enough to let me use their stuff in my videos. So that's really cool. Let me link to that. Gotta promote that. Sub to KK Music. One of the songs I was using a lot is this one right here, Circular. And this is the one that's at the start and end of my hacking videos recently. And I've also used a couple of the other ones for like Git visualization videos and stuff. I don't know, I really love their style, and I feel it really fits well with the type of videos I was making. So it was a nice thing where it just worked out. And I think, by the way, like if you really like it and you want to use it in your videos, I'm sure that if you ask nicely, I'm sure that could be arranged as well. Let's see. Dun, 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 dun. Liam says, finish this project. Nah, welcome to development. Well, I don't know. I don't think development has to be like that, but who knows? Let's see. Pedro says, do you miss the old web? Personal pages instead of templated profiles in social media sites. I don't know if... I mean, the old web is still there to an extent. It just doesn't get updated much. I enjoyed the early days of the web for sure. It was fun when people made their own homepages, and that was the norm. I had my own homepages. My friends had their own homepages. It was a lot of fun. And I would love to see more of that, but I don't know if that's happening or what. But yes, I enjoy the old web. At the same time, I enjoy the current web too. Like, it has a lot of awesome stuff on it. I really like them. I feel like the resources that are available to me today on the current web are way more awesome than the few resources we had in the old web 25 years ago when I first got on. So, mixed feelings. Let's see. Guilherme says, interacting with the code is a great tip. Also stepping through with a debugger. Also, I find it helps to start reading from the data structures rather than the logic at first. Yeah, that's a really good tip, actually. Looking at the data structures to figure out what is in this thing. Like, what kind of members does this struct have, for example? It gives you nice contextual awareness of what you're looking at. Very good tip. Buidelarat says, SerenityOS is great fun and your recovery is inspirational. Stay strong, brother, and thank you. Well, thank you, Buidelarat. I really appreciate that. And I do my best to stay strong. And thank you. You stay strong through, too. Brescia? Brescia. I don't know exactly how to pronounce that. But A says, do you have anyone you regularly meet in person to discuss SerenityOS with or programming in general? In person? No, I don't. Other than my wife, who has to listen to listen to me talk about SerenityOS quite a lot. But she is not a programmer herself, so it's mostly me talking a lot, and then she talks about the stuff that she's working on, and then I listen to that. But it's mostly mutually beneficial one-way communication. Let's see. Dun, 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 dun. Alex Gravener says, were you involved in getting Serenity running on bare metal? Tips for debugging in that environment. So, I don't know. That's a tricky question because I've gotten it running on my own machine. I've done a lot of work, a lot of patches to make Serenity work on my own hardware. So I guess I have been involved in getting it running on bare metal, but other people have done a lot more for their hardware, and it's not an area that I'm super interested in personally. So it ends up with other people doing more of that work. And if you want to debug that kind of stuff, I recommend joining the bare metal channel on Discord. They will have way better tips than I do for debugging those type of things, because there are some things that like I wouldn't recommend doing. I've suffered through them myself, like debugging without a null modem cable and things like that, without a serial console, which is really, really unpleasant. And I've gotten Serenity running on hardware without having a serial console, and like being able to debug only by like writing out debug information to a text file and then rebooting into Linux, reading from that text file to see what went wrong, and then like rebooting into Serenity over and over and over. I've done that. It's not fun. And if you have a serial console, it can be a lot more efficient, but I didn't have a cable for it. But the people in the bare metal channel, they do this much more regularly than I do, so they will have better advice. So my recommendation is to join that channel, see what they say. Ömer says, hello Andreas, what is the thing that most bugs you in SerenityOS these days? Ooh, what bugs me the most in SerenityOS these days? That's a good question. I need to look at it to see what bugs me. Something that I keep thinking about, but I don't think that I'm going to work on anytime soon, is that it bothers me a little bit that we don't have our own vector font. We have Serenity Sans, which is hilarious, of course, but it's also kind of a joke font, or joke typeface. Wait, it's not even here. Oh, because it's not monospace. It would be really lovely to have a good-looking vector font of our own. Hello, friends. Something that that really captured the style of Serenity, but I started making one once, and I found that it was just not work that made me happy. So not something I'm going to do anytime soon, but it keeps irritating me a little bit. So maybe it's something I have to do to still that irritation within myself. I don't know. And of course, while using vector fonts, it makes me wish that we had better support for them. Let's see. Slendy says, there's a new kid on the block, NeoCities. Yeah, NeoCities. There's a lot of fun web pages on NeoCities, for sure. definitely respect what they're trying to do. Jeje says, some of the definitions I've read of Web 3.0 reminds me of the old web, so a comeback might be on the way. Yeah, well, I'm not sure that Web 3.0 has your best interests at heart, I would say. Whatever they do with under that umbrella seems to be, it seems to me that they're more interested in taking your money than making anything nice. And making anything nice is kind of a secondary concern, and the main concern is just taking people's money. So I'm slightly skeptical, but we'll see. Maybe I'm wrong. I would love to be wrong. I would love for nice things to happen, of course. Let's see. Big Mistake says, I don't really have anybody in my environment who codes either. It's so funny and a bit lonely how impossible it is to explain what we do to non-coders. Those glazy eyes. Yeah. I've lived in both environments. Like, when I grew up, as a kid, I didn't know anybody who was into programming. And as an adult, I left my home to move to like work in another country. And then I didn't know anybody except my coworkers. And suddenly I found myself in this environment where I only hung out with programmers, having never hung out with programmers much before. That was a really big change, and it was a lot of fun. But I have to say, I find life a lot more comfortable when I don't just hang out with programmers all day and night. I mean, I still interact with programmers all day and night online, but like outside of the computer, I have this kind of normal life with no other programmers, and it's has a charm to it. I don't know, but maybe I'll get that urge eventually to be around more programmers again. But at the moment, it is nice to live outside those big, high concentration programmer locations. Polish Civil says, not Polish, Polish. I don't know what it is about your streams, but thank you very much for them. Each coding stream so chill, almost ASMR-like. Result, okay. Most depressing one. Laughed for an hour. Go Serenity. Well, I don't remember what this might be in reference to, but I'm glad you laughed for an hour. This is a long laugh. Big Mistake says, ooh, there is support for vector fonts. Yes, there is support for vector fonts. We can load true type fonts like the classic TTF, OTF, open type format. We also have support for WAF, so web fonts can be loaded in the browser. Let's see. Koyan says, I kept urging my twin brother to get into programming. Now I have at least one person to talk to about this stuff. Cool. Twins. I have to say, like, the idea of having a twin has always been really cool to me. And I guess it's really mundane to you because you have one. But, like, how cool does it seem to have a friend or a brother or a sister who looks just like you? You could do so many silly pranks. I don't know why. I just suddenly got all these stupid ideas for pranks. Jeje says, for your information, we are working on Kotica TTF. It is still on the draft planning testing stage, but the work has started. Wild. That's super cool. Let me correct the spelling on it though before it gets too far. So this is a katetsa. You may recognize it as a ladybug, and it's spelled like that, katetsa. So you don't want the last I. But that sounds very cool. Keyboard G says, my favorite time on the web was around when You're the Man Now Dog was popular and it was flush with memes. Yeah, I remember YTMND. That was a long time ago now. But I don't know when my favorite period was. I guess, you know what I really enjoyed back in the day was Homestar Runner. That was a good show. I guess I can't even load it anymore because I don't have Flash. But I think I've probably watched all of those episodes. Wow, that's a big donation banner. Maybe later. Send me an email or... Geez, they're very persistent. Yes, this was maybe my favorite thing online for a long time. Anyway, I'm getting so all over the place here. Let's get back to questions. Vishnu says, is it possible to stream Serenity? I don't know exactly what that means. Do you mean stream to YouTube from Serenity? No, we currently cannot do that. We don't have screen capture or video encoding or generally support for any of the streaming platforms within Serenity. But you can stream Serenity like this within a virtual environment, of course. That's what I currently do. Koyan says, having a twin is fun most of the time. Right, so it's just like having a sibling, basically. Didos says, the hardest aspect for me as a beginner at the age of 26 is finding motivation. Instead, I spend far too much time watching live streams / videos on programming rather than actually programming. Well, what are you doing here then? I mean, I guess even if it goes against my own interests of keeping an audience, I guess I should encourage you to turn off this live stream and go work on something that you want to get done. Because you're right. Watching live streams and videos about programming can give you inspiration, can teach you things, but there comes a point where you hit diminishing returns and you are not gaining enough from watching more content, and you need to actually engage with programming on your own. And if you have this feeling, then I am sure that you've already hit that point, and you need to go and do something yourself. You just have to force yourself away from the comfortable drip of YouTube and similar things. It's for the better, you know. You if you want to improve, you have to practice. Like, no amount of book learning is going to make you really, really good. Like, with no practice, it doesn't matter. You have to practice. Lofty says, oh, hey, it's the pop-up that was causing you performance issues on Wikipedia. Yeah, I guess that was it. Was that? It's one of those pop-ups, at least. Yeah, that was like this SVG clip masked pop-ups that we had in the performance video I did about Wikipedia in the SerenityOS browser. Funny. Let's see. Indian operating system says, oh, iOS. Sir, how scheduling works in Serenity in SMP mode? How it gets started? Does Serenity use an individual scheduler for each core? So the scheduler is really, really quite simple. And you can read all of it in kernel scheduler.cpp. The way it works in SMP mode, I have to admit, I haven't looked at it in a long time, so I don't remember how it works. Let's go and figure out what it does. I feel like we have some kind of, what do we have? Each processor surely has some kind of queue or something. Or at least the current process. Dum dum dum. Current thread. Okay, so we have a current thread. Every processor has a current thread and its own idle thread. Sure. Okay, so there's an idle thread for each processor and a current thread. And then I guess when the scheduler runs, I would imagine that it just looks for a suitable thread with a suitable CPU affinity, and then makes that the current thread for the CPU. So you can figure that out by looking at pull next runnable thread. This is where we figure out which thread to run next. So let's see, we look through our ready queues, looking for something with a matching priority. Sure. And if we find a non-active thread with suitable affinity, then we'll make that thread active and return it. Yeah, okay, so in general, like, the scheduler is a simple round-robin scheduler with priority queues. So you have like a high priority queue, medium priority queue, low priority queue, grossly simplified, and you kind of round robin your way through the high priority threads until that queue is exhausted, and then you round robin your way through the mid priority threads and so on until you have nothing but low priority stuff to do. So that's sort of how it works. And the way that we boot it up in SMP mode, I don't remember either. I imagine that it's somewhere where we start the... No. Yeah, I need to look at this in detail to actually remember how it works. Let's see. Everybody gets an idle loop. So who initiates that? Create AP idle thread. Okay, so this is creating idle threads for an application processor. So like everybody except the boot processor will get an AP idle thread. And those are spawned by do boot APs right here. Okay, yeah, so this is where we boot up the scheduler for each of the all of the secondary processors in SMP mode. So that's where you can start looking. Let's see. Reymar says, speaking of Flash, has anyone shown interest in adding support for Flash in Serenity? I have not heard of a single person wanting to do that. Andreas says, keeping it in the background is what I do as well while working away on stuff. Yeah, it's I do that sometimes too. Like I put on some programming video in the background because it's kind of nice to hear somebody typing a little bit and talking about mumbling about programming while I'm doing my own stuff. But I can only handle so much of it though until it becomes distracting. I don't know. It's interesting to me that some people say that they listen to this stuff like hour after hour every day. That seems very difficult to me. But everybody's different. But I mean, I have to reiterate that, like, if you are watching my content on YouTube and it's getting in the way of you being productive on things that you want to do, please stop watching my content, go work on your stuff, and then come back later when you've built some stuff, and don't let me soak up your time that you would rather spend on improving your own skills, right? If you feel like you're losing valuable time to content like this or like other stuff on YouTube or anywhere else on the web, if you feel like that's not healthy for you, then that's probably true, and you need to scale it back a little bit. Something to be aware of. Sophia says, I started drawing again yesterday. It's so fun to do something more creative than gaming and watching other people's stuff. Totally agree. Totally. It is really, really fun to do creative stuff. It doesn't have to be programming. It doesn't have to be technical at all. Like just making things is rejuvenating, I find, and really good for the soul. Let's see. Thomas says, do you have any plans/ideas? Well, I can already tell you that I don't have any plans. But let's read on. Do you have any ideas for new security features in the kernel or browser? I can imagine that having full control opens up opportunities for defensive tooling or new forms of mitigations. Yes, there are a lot of mitigations and defensive techniques that we can do. And it's almost an area where the one area where I wish we had even more control, like if we also control the hardware, because then we could do even cooler techniques. But I think with security, like the main thing we have going for us with the amount of control that we have is that whatever security mitigations we come up with, it's very easy to make use of them everywhere in the system. So unlike something like Google Chrome or Firefox or something like that, where if they invent some good security technique, then it's still kind of just confined to that one piece of software. Whereas if we come up with something smart, then we can make use of it everywhere in the system, which is really awesome. There are a couple of techniques I would like to do or like to investigate doing. Like isolated heaps, for example, are a very interesting technique where you give say that you would give each class its own heap so that all of the objects next to each other in memory, they're all of the same type, and you don't have like objects of different types mixed together in the same heap. That's a technique used in a lot of Apple software, and or in some Apple software, I should say. And it's a very cool technique, but it's hard to do without bloating up your heap like crazy. So it needs to be careful. But it has really nice benefits because it makes type confusion attacks much harder, and sort of by segregating objects of the same type to their own heaps, it's much harder to like create fake objects and write arbitrary data into them, right? So that's very easy today because you can allocate an object and then allocate a string, and then you put whatever you want in the string and they're in the same heap. And then you just need to convince the program to think that your string is one of those objects instead. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think these are called isolated heaps or ISO heaps. WebKit heap hardening. Yeah, that's definitely a sweet technique. There are many sweet heap hardening techniques in WebKit and JavaScript core, actually. Anyways, there are many other things as well, just me thinking out loud, but I don't have a plan. Many ideas, but no plan. Let's see. Ognian says, is it possible to run SerenityOS on Windows in VirtualBox without WSL? I think so, probably. I haven't tried it, but Serenity should run in VirtualBox, and it would probably be a hassle to build it on Windows without WSL. But if you have the built product, then I guess you can run it in VirtualBox. But I really would recommend just getting WSL, because at least from my experience using WSL, it really makes Windows like 10 times better. At least that was my experience with WSL. I felt so limited by Windows until I got WSL, at which point it just opened up and became super useful. Let's see. Darius says, how to profile an optimized, also link time optimized build accurately. Is there any way to get information on a line detail level? So sometimes yes, sometimes no. Optimized builds do have typically like some trouble with that, because especially when you get like cross compilation unit inlining with LTO, then you lose a lot of like line number information, because it's just not possible to do that anymore. But the best way to do it, I guess, is to try to build as much debug info as you can, and then you just have to eyeball it and figure out like what corresponds to what. I don't know if there's any automated way to sort of improve the debuggability of heavily optimized builds. Usually when, like, if you're looking at a heavily optimized build that you've profiled and you're unable to figure out like what part of the code is this, then you really have to like dig down into instruction level profiling and see sort of each individual instruction, what's it doing, and then try to read along and figure out what's going on. Big Smoke CIC says, has someone made a debugger for Serenity? Sure, we have the famous Serenity Debugger, SDB, also known as a debugger. It also has a GUI in Hack Studio, but I have to admit I have not. I don't have the compiler port built anyway. But yes, we have a debugger. It's called Debugger. Wait, if I click on Debugger, it opens Help? I'm confused. That doesn't seem right. Why is that the default? What the heck? Open in Help. Why would I want to open it in Help if I'm double clicking on it? What a strange behavior. Definitely not sure I like that one. That seems really counterintuitive. Seems to me like if I double click on an executable, I want to run it. Anyway, Lofty says, how does the profiler work? Aha. So the profiler works by capturing samples of the current execution stack. So essentially, 1,000 times per second, we pause the process. I mean, in very simplified terms, we pause the process 1,000 times per second, and then check what is the current execution stack of this process. And then we save that to a big buffer where we save all these stacks. And in Serenity, we do that with what are these called? Add perf event. Add CPU sample event. Yes, that's the one. So add CPU sample event is called whenever the timer ticks. So when the scheduler timer ticks, we make a CPU sample event and put it into the buffer. This is only happening if profiling is enabled, by the way. And then we can capture as many of those as we can fit in our buffer. And then when you stop profiling and actually open this file that you've now generated in the profiler GUI, we just take all of those stacks and sort of combine them into a tree representation where you see the more frequently occurring stacks, sort of, if that makes sense. So if you look at, let me show you what that looks like in practice, actually. So if we profile, let's just profile everything. Type a little bit, resize a little bit. Oops. So if we, this is what a typical Serenity profile looks like, and we can actually go here under samples. And here we can see each individual sample, what it looks like. So the very first one was sampled right here, and we see that it has an index, it has a timestamp, and we note that we only sample when there's something running on the CPU. So we don't sample when completely idle, which is why you often see sort of gaps in timestamps, because like, well, there was nothing happening there for a moment. As we talked about earlier, like Serenity really is a lightweight system, so much so that if you're not touching the keyboard or the mouse, then the system is like actually idle for big chunks of time, which is pretty nice compared to any other system, basically. So what you see here on the left is like every sample, and then on the right you can see what the stack looked like when we sample the CPU at that point in time. So at this moment we were executing bin Windows server, and it was doing basically this. It was in select, which then had called into the kernel and then doing a bunch of kernel stuff. The sampling interval is not randomized, but there is a bit of slack to it sometimes, so it's not perfect, but almost perfect, I guess. I wish I could say it's perfect. I've noticed sometimes it gets out of sync a little bit. And one thing that we do is that we turn off interrupts sometimes in the kernel for various reasons. And when that happens, we are not able to service the profiling system. So like, because when interrupts are disabled on the CPU, we're not getting the timer interrupts. So we're not figuring out, oh, we need to actually take a sample. So we have the lost samples column here, which tells you, for example, on this guy right here, we had 2 lost samples, which means that we lost, we were like running with interrupts disabled for the equivalent of 2 samples. And that can be good when you're trying to understand like, why is something slow and I don't have a lot of samples. But if you go and look, you see that, oh, actually there were 7 samples here. We were just had interrupts disabled. So something to be aware of. Tom Magnus says, I was checking out the video from boot to GUI, and it seems a little outdated, code-wise, I mean. Do you think it's worth an update? Maybe it is. Probably, maybe. I mean, every old video is a little bit outdated. They're not so much meant to be like, I mean, they're obviously not meant to be references that stay valid forever because the project keeps changing. So it might be even better to make some kind of document that we can collaboratively update as we go. But that's not to say that it wouldn't be nice to make a boot to GUI update video or a new revised video. It might be kind of interesting to look at a lot of the things that have changed since then. Yeah, so many things to make. Let's see, Ukrainian KGB says, since you were talking about security features, do you think implementing signed executables, as in PGP signed, refuse to run if invalid signature in an operating system would be viable, ignoring JIT and scripts? Do I think signed executables would be viable? I mean, sure, you could do that. but ultimately somebody has to be the authority on that stuff. So I mean, like, you have to store your keys somewhere, and we don't have any drivers or anything for like any kind of hardware features that would help us do that in a secure way. So it would be like entirely in software. I'm just thinking, how would that look like? You could definitely do it in software, but it would only be as secure as your kernel. But maybe that would be okay as a starting point. Yeah, I don't see why you couldn't do that, but not really something I'm personally interested in working on at the moment. Let's see. Kyle said, what is the progress on Discord and browser? The progress at the moment is that I didn't work on it for multiple weeks, so I haven't looked at it. But there are a bunch of layout issues still, and I spent a lot of time, like before I went on Easter vacation, I was spending a whole lot of time on Flexbox layout and other layout things. So it is in decent shape, but still a lot of things to do. And I think it falls apart. Oh, there, for example. The next thing I wanted to work on was the login screen. So we have the invite screen kind of working, but the login screen has some weird issues where like the part where you put your username and password, they're like too small. And also the QR code for QR login doesn't show up. I need to debug that. But I know that at least 1 or 2 people have shown screenshots where they were logged into Discord, so it is possible to log in if you do a fair bit of hacks and hand-holding. But it's not really in good enough shape yet to go all the way without tricks. Anyway, we are out of time, so I gotta wrap it up. But it's good to be back. Thank you all for coming to office hours, and for all the lovely questions, for the super chats and everything else. I'm really happy that you're all here. And once again, to the people who feel like you're spending too much time watching things like this, go and work on your stuff and you'll feel better, I promise. But you can come back later. Anyway, if you end up working on SerenityOS this weekend, please come hang out on Discord and share what you're doing. Let's see some screenshots and share the enthusiasm. And I will see you all next time. Bye.